not in the same way.
Okay, because you said, didn't you say you're there till 83?
Yes.
Okay, now 83 is such a significant date.
Yeah. August 12th.
Yeah. Without me giving you any leeway on this, and
well, I'll tell you what happened.
Tell us what happened from your perspective.
I'll tell you what I know.
Okay.
In 1983, August 12th, now there was a psychic that was used predominantly to help open these vortices and other software that was downloaded by computer.
Was that Duncan?
He would sit on this chair, which was hooked up to his brain, and whatever he thought, the computer would generate and download. Now, someone was supposed to be monitoring him, but I guess after all those years, they started getting too lazy or familiar with the process, and he was left alone on the chair, and he fell asleep and had a nightmare. And in the nightmare, he generated this monster energetically that the computer then created physically. And this creature, which they call Junior, started tearing up the base and creating havoc. And they could not turn it off because it kind of had a life of its own. The only way to stop it was to destroy the equipment. So in that one night, after all those years, they just destroyed everything just to shut down this creature from continuing its havoc. Now, the embodiment or energy of that creature is still in the energy field at Montauk. In fact, even in recent years, people who have taken pictures of the area have seen or photographed the outline of it.
Yeah.
Wow. I wonder who that psychic was in the Montauk chair. Now, anybody that has dared to investigate this properly, you would have spent quite a bit of time listening to these four frauds. Al Bielek, a.k.a. Edward Cameron, his little brother Duncan Cameron, Preston Nichols, and this goofball right here, Stuart Swerdlow. Now, they always claim that they somehow Preston and Duncan, who at that time would have been a very young man in his early 20s, they suddenly got a conscience and said that we've got to shut this down because it's getting out of hand. Some very evil activities have taken place, and we need to rise above all this and stop this nonsense. So there's numerous versions on what really happened on August 12th, 1983, nearly 39 years ago, come Friday. And what's amazing is about these conspiracy theories is it's like a fishing story, right? The fish gets bigger and bigger. So the first question in anybody's mind is only 4 individuals are able to give life, give breath, give legs to this Montauk conspiracy. Now, Stuart, he would come into this well after Al and Preston. And we're going to immediately exclude Duncan. I'll get to this in a minute because he never really had much to say. This dopey Draco hybrid, mealy-mouthed dopey Draco hybrid, the lead psychic of the Montauk Project. But they always did say there were alternates and other psychics. And it's amazing that with these 4 people, beginning with Al, Preston, and Duncan, that they create this myth. But the genius of it all is, as time moved forward depending on what was going on with the real victims over at Montauk. And now remember, the other aspect is that Al is saying that there were millions of these young boys programmed. Initially, they're saying that, oh, okay, they picked them off the street, runaways that would have not been missed. No one would have cared about them. And so essentially they would kidnap these kids off the street, and this would have been before 1980, doing trial and error concerning the interaction of humans with electromagnetic energy. But that, I believe, is possible. They would definitely do that, because in MK Ultra, the way it worked is you have bloodliners and non-bloodliners, meaning Gentiles, as opposed to someone tied to the Abrahamic blood link. Now, during the trial and error of the 50s and 60s research and development, when they would try to, I guess, go into an experiment initially, they would more often than not use a non-bloodliner just to see what the initial response reaction would have been. And then if they felt that, okay, we're moving in the right direction, that's when they would put the bloodliner in, meaning someone connected to Germanic ancestry, someone connected to the Abrahamic blood link, the Israelites. So by the time you come to Montauk, clearly at this point, the two goals in mind concern mind control and also time travel. Now, by the time you come to 1980, which is where I come in, all right, remember, they would position these boys around this area, and I show up in Vernon, New Jersey, November of 1979. So the first myth is, no, there's not millions of these boys that were programmed back then. So what you're saying is millions of parents, all right, would have been involved in this to make all this happen. And then the other aspect is, not one Montauk boy has came forward and said, hey, I remember Stuart, I remember Preston, I remember Al, this is what happened. They never, ever talk about these Montauk boys. This is the most sickening part. Disgusting, despicable with these sad sack Edomite Jew Satanists. That they got away with, definitely, they got blood on their hands. There was a lot of life lost in trying to get this time travel functioning properly, if that is the case. Now, one that has a modicum of knowledge of Scripture, we understand thousands of years ago, these observer of times, these diviners, these sorcerers, would, however the ritual works, in order to peek into the future, they would have, their number one goal is to understand when exactly their time is up, because they understand Scripture better than anybody else, that no man knows the day or hour, but we're to understand the appointed times, we're to understand the seasons, and when we see certain events occur, we know that our salvation is nigh. So with that being said, they know that, hey, they're going to crawl right back under their rocks, wherever they came from, right, folks? Because they think they're going to avoid Armageddon. So the two main myths, again, I will repeat myself for the millionth time. This is the last time I go over this. You people are on your own after this. And good luck to all you. But no, no way in hell millions of parents, all right, would have let their children fall into the hands of these Satanists. You have the dynamic of the baby boomers being duped, but some of them are on board that were tied into the military industrial satanic complex. And, unfortunately, my family, as I've kept stating, they were tracked for hundreds of years like other families, and they weren't forgotten. Once they were done wrecking Europe, they, in earnest, came over to the United States. And, with them, time doesn't matter because they feel they're in such control that they can move at their own pace. So, again, they don't know. Stewart is the only one, and he is on record. I have this on tape of him saying that he retained his memories for the most part. So he can't identify anybody, none of these Montauk boys. So I'm gonna leave it at that, because what will happen is I'll get more riled up, and these social media frauds that picked up the story, all right, right? They were Al, Preston, and Stewart gave this conspiracy life, and then you have the ones that followed. Now you got to remember, there would have been curiosity seekers, actual real people that have nothing to do with these Satanists, but yet it's a curiosity, and that's what I don't understand, how they've been able to limit people's ability to have an open mind and be like, question things, not just go along with what is being told. And this is the uniqueness of America. But this all circles back to these Israelites who, they knew to stay away from these people. Do not follow the customs or behavior after the nations you shall possess. They are an abomination to the Lord your God. So one aspect of Montauk that we know, there were these rituals done. There's no way around it. But what the Germans were able to do before World War II is, with these rituals, and this comes from Schneebellen, all right? This is so complicated, but you have to factor in some of these individuals. And Schneebellen's, one thing that he added to this that makes sense is that these Nazis, these Germans, they, with nuts and bolts hardware, advanced technology, whether it came from the so-called aliens or just, these men in these laboratories, by trial and error, were able to, create this hardware, but they would amplify the effect of the rituals as it relates to sound, frequency, vibration. And so imagine thousands of years ago, these Canaanites and all the other groups that are described in Genesis chapter 15, verses 19 through 21, that when they would do these rituals, these sacrifices to Moloch, Baal, there would be drumming, chanting, and they would do it in locations where, maybe in a valley, or take, for instance, the Edomites over in these cliffs. I forget the exact location. It's in Jordan, where sound would echo. But if you're an Israelite, you hear all this going on, you're going to have a curiosity for some of them, unfortunately, to go see what the heck is this all about. And that's how they would get sucked in. And that's why it's necessary you have these precepts, instructions from Yahweh, the Elohim, take your pick, the Almighty Creator, Ancient of Days, Adonai, telling them, stay away, don't get involved in any of this. But curiosity killed the cat. Next thing you know, you're sacrificing your firstborn. Because, again, Scripture is taken seriously by these Satanists. These Egyptians understood, they understood that the 10 plagues, being the last one concerning the firstborn being killed, was serious business. And just off that alone is enough to put this the enmity in full-blown motion, to where their very existence is to seek vengeance on the death of their firstborn. And in a modern sense concerning satanic ritual abuse, with these Illuminati characters over in Europe and wherever else they fester, it's something about that they know when these individuals pop out that they're connected to the Abrahamic blood link. And if they do not get to them right away, and they're allowed to become God-fearing adults, they will stand in the way of these Satanists. So, again, for the last time, where are these Montauk boys? If there was millions of them, that means millions of parents couldn't be clueless about this. They didn't just hand over these children. So that's the first myth. It was a very small group concerning who was involved between the years of 80 and 83. So let's go slow down for a minute and let's immediately eliminate Duncan. Now, the way this works is there was an event that occurred on August 12th, 1983, that caused these Satanists to put the brakes on, to, what do I tell you people, plot, plan, recruit, and regroup. Because the event that happened was irreversible. And in order to keep this a secret, a lot of people would have initially lost their life. And this is what I'm saying. These 4 goofballs, only 4 people, they keep talking about, the station manager, Jack Pruitt. This asshole was never nowhere to be found. There's this broad, Chica Bruce, who got herself involved. And she apparently talked to Pruitt's son. And she had spoken with Stewart and Preston face to face. So she's put in question. And look, I've gone over this in these other videos. But the thing of it is, they throw out a couple names, but there's no one else to be found. Now, what was my old man doing? Okay, he worked down in Paramus, New Jersey, Fairfield actually, for an engineering company. And it's very curious that all these individuals tied to the military-industrial satanic complex, they all become electrical engineers, all right? That's the CIA's cover story for a lot of these sellouts, like my old man. So he's down there in Fairfield, next door to Paramus, where we know there's a deep underground military base. And then up by me in the Appalachians, there's another base called the Picatinny Arsenal, which would have been used. But the point being is that there's an individual by the name of Andy Pirro. He's one of the few individuals that sounds somewhat credible. Now, when you hear his story, yes, he's talking a lot about a lot of incredible stuff, all right? But if you look what happened to Andy Pirro, who's long gone, who knows where he is, he's dead. He was thrown in jail at the time that he was getting involved talking about all this, but he claims that a lot of the beta programming, Montauk programming concerning these little girls took place in Paramus, New Jersey, and out on Plum Island. There's this other bimbo, JoJo Seebacher, who claims to be a Montauk girl, and she, again, man, if I gotta, this is why I can't do these videos, because I've done them already. This is why this is the last time. But they still, none of them got their stories straight, and they will not incorporate scripture or even lend any type of credit to the Almighty Creator for saving them. They keep going back to that. Somehow they are able, like Stewart, 13 cube your way out of this. What does James Gilligan always say? Oh, you got to release the past and all this. Man, and people lap this stuff up because their shtick is they speak calmly, rationally. That's how they're trained. And they, while driving the real victims crazy, making them, have outbursts, all right? Their shtick is they know they got this act with these Hollywood hybrids where they're all calm, cool, and collected, but once they start to lie, what happens, folks? And now I'm going to show you what happens right now. So one of the videos that was done was back in 1992. I have these other videos because they're date time stamped with when it happened. So this one right here is a very long 3-hour session with Preston, Duncan, and the goofball Peter Moon. Now, he had already wrote his book because they were talking about it. So this means that this video had to take place around 1992. And how we just eliminate Duncan off the bat is he never had anything to say. They didn't train him properly. He sits there like a bump on a log, and when he does speak, he's all mealy mouth, and this guy was supposed to, according to Al, Duncan went off to Edinburgh, Scotland, and got his degree in physics, while we know Al claims he went to Harvard and got his physics degree. But let's look at Preston real quick. And he's describing the interaction with Charlie the Draco. Now, they're on this major project, and Preston says that they ran out of soldering paste. I can't imagine that, but that's what he says. And so he goes into this explanation. Well, as we all know, sodium hydroxide is what essentially soldering paste is made of. And what he did is he got a canister of Drano, which is essentially the same thing, according to Preston. So he gets this Drano, he starts making up this mix of solder paste, and the Draco Charlie comes in. Hey, what are you guys up to? And he sees it. And what the Draco does, it's in a cup. He drinks it. Now this is so outrageous. But when you watch, when Preston's talking about this guy's always touching himself, scratching himself, because once he gets into the phony baloney, the just most outrageous part of the story, he starts to shapeshift. Now, again, what do we look for? These hybrids, what's their main issues with the electromagnetic distortion? Eyeballs, mouth, and hands, or exposed skin. Now, the one thing that you see at the bottom of his hand, what I call the sawtooth effect. You can clearly see that right there. So what happens is Preston's freaking out. All right. He's freaking out, and essentially he loses it. What do they all do? They have to cover their face, and look how his hand goes limp, and you get the electromagnetic distortion. Now Duncan, he's sitting there and he can't believe what he's hearing. He don't even want to be there. So I want to back up too, concerning how the hybrids correct whatever it is that's going on inside them, these lazy lying lizards. All right, they touch their self. Now why is that? Because over the course of 1,000 years, these sad sack Satanist Edomite Jew retards understand that humans have behavioral traits. What happens when you get an itch on your nose? You're going to scratch it to get rid of it. What happens when you get something in your eye? You're going to start rubbing your eye. Are you people understanding what I'm telling you? So they pick up on these traits, and so that way, when they start to go haywire, they can correct whatever is going wrong, but at the same time, it looks like this is just natural. I'm just scratching my nose, I'm rubbing my eye. Well, if you ever watch Preston, this guy, because he's one of the original hybrids, right? The group from 47 to 60, they got the most electromagnetic distortion, but now watch. Well, first look at Duncan's chin, how that's starting to warp out, but watch this. They are cracking up. Now let's see if we can dial this in real good. Look at Duncan's mouth. And you see how right here you get the geometric pattern. It's stair steps. Look at his mouth. Now look, we see how where the cheeks can fold over. That's why you see kind of that. But look at the stair step and the geometric pattern. Duncan is nothing more than a lazy lying lizard hybrid, a perfectly formed one. Because what they were doing is they knew in order to, through a series of attrition, all right, to rid this earth of the Abrahamic blood link, what they need to do is assimilate into the general population, look like them, learn how to talk like them. And these Juilliard-trained lazy lying lizards, the initial group from the late 40s and 50s, were placed in positions of power and influence. They were able to make decisions on who lives, dies, gets help, gets work, all right? And this would not be an easy process. This would, it took time for them doing that. But in the process of doing this, they first would have to have a perfectly kind of formed hybrid. And then whatever it is that on how they were able to get these individuals placed in government, the judicial system, the legal system, all right, the medical system, are the three main institutions that they needed to control. And then as we see now, it has kind of sprinkled down into the lower level blue collar police, detectives, psychiatrists is a very important part. Because the machine, the buzzsaw, once the victim survives and then they want to speak out about that, the only way to mitigate this, abate this, short of just killing them outright, which is what they did thousands of years ago, they have to get them in their buzzsaw and get them put into these forums, meaning court situations, whether it's a Social Security disability hearing where Judge Levin, the fixer, makes me look like an asshole so he can get me on the street, make me destitute, and then they hope that you kill yourself, all right? Because the Satanists don't want to go through all this stalking and having to be, plotting and planning. Again, I've been in Rosarito now dealing with this 7 years head on. These assholes have been camped out down here, totally duped these poor Mexicans. But the Mexicans love the Jew buck. They don't care about America. It's only about how to get their hands on the Jew buck. And look, you know the rest of this story. I've already gone down this route with these goofballs down here. And I'll give you a typical example. I tried to walk off. I didn't try. I walked off to get some coffee here a little bit, about an hour ago. And they used these poor young Mexican girls. And so she's sitting there because they know I'm going to go to this one spot. She's waiting on me. And then when I come back, I notice that in her hand, her phone, I could see it. She has a map of the neighborhood. Now, we've all heard about this with these apps that these stalkers get, right, up in the United States on how they can position these people, to get them where they need to be in time to intercept, essentially to find out where the victim is headed. Now, these spotters are just clueless. So I asked the girl, I said, hey, is everything okay? And the same look every time with every last one of them. It's a blank stare that they understand. I know that you're a little pissant spotter stalker, that you don't know any better, and that these Satanists who've been down here, they want to drag all these Mexicans to hell with them. And I'm going to just stop there because see how I get off track and worked up. Now, again, I have to make the statement that while there, as many of these neighbors and everybody getting bought off, there's quite a few Mexicans that have been helping me. And they are to be commended. God bless them. So, as we see, Duncan is nothing but a flaming Draco hybrid lazy lying lizard being used by these goofballs. Now, let's also make this clear that all four of them were part of this Montauk Project. It actually happened. A lot of what was said is actually true, but the one thing that no one can prove to this day is the alien involvement. According to Al, there's all these different alien groups. The B-Syrians were the Galaxy hardware merchants. You've got the Orion group, the Palladians, which are the fallen angels, the gray aliens. But, all right, Stewart, who retained his memories, he was able to elaborate a little bit on this. But again, this goofball, nothing. So let's move on. Now, the initial hybrid group, 47 to 60, the most electromagnetic distortion. Do you see? It's amazing that no one picked up on this sooner. That's the genius of it all, because America has been fast asleep. All right. They're probably the dog walkers are out there. They love to make my dog Lucas go nuts. And these stalkers get off on the fact that when I point out sometimes their little shenanigans, what they do is they always will, the very next day or whenever they can, they just keep upping the ante, sending these clueless, dopey. Some of them, you'd be surprised. There's a large contingent of Americans down here that they get involved in the stalking too. This asshole Josh from the beginning, hanging out with the one of the bought and paid perps, Jose, down there with his dopey girlfriend that I did the Segunda with. I don't know where you are, Josh. You're still listening? You're lucky I've yet to see you again, all right? But they got no clue that they're dealing with these lazy, lying lizards. Now, let's continue. We'll get to Al. So, what it was is, here's one of the initial videos where you see, come on, Lucas, where you see Al, Preston, and Duncan. They're being interviewed probably for the first time. And the way this works is how they all come together is just complete serendipity, I guess. Al claims that in 1985, he's in Ohio, of all places, Uncle Carl's backyard, and he's at a psychotronics conference where Preston and Duncan are together, and they initially meet up, or they're talking to each other, and not much is recollected back then, but the point being is they were only literally, I would be graduating high school that summer too. They were less than 2 years from the August 12th, 83 event. And what would happen is that, again, whether the connection was made at this conference, I forget, they would get together again in May of 86 out in Long Island and start to piece things together and make their first trip out to Montauk. Now, drip by drip, slowly these memories were coming back to Al and Preston. Because forget about Duncan. So what happens is, what really does it for Al is what we know to be a movie called The Philadelphia Experiment. And concerning Montauk, the Philadelphia Experiment goes hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other, according to Al. So the long short of the Philadelphia Experiment is, it is August 12th, 1943. They had been working for over 20 years on making things invisible. They came up with radar, obviously, other technological advances, but here they are. They're in the Philadelphia harbor. They want to make not an aircraft carrier, but a ship. The more concern was making the merchant ships invisible to the wolf pack, which were destroying them out on the Atlantic when we were bringing supplies to England. So the story goes is Edward Cameron now, who became Al Bielek, with his brother, and this is the funny part. Al says there was 33 picked volunteers, a contingent of officers and general naval enlisted personnel that chose to go on the Eldridge that day. Now what happens is they've got the equipment fired up. They create this electromagnetic field around the Eldridge. And what happens is not only does it become invisible, but it disappears completely. Now the story goes that a lot of this technology came from Tesla. But what happened is Tesla was getting cold feet, according to Al, and he sabotaged an earlier experiment to release himself from the government and get away from these, take your pick what you want to call them. It's the military industrial satanic complex, these intellectual barbarians, these sad sack Satanists. So what happens is, this is when von Neumann comes into the picture. They tweak some of the equipment, all right, to get this electromagnetic field pulsed. But what happens is it became so powerful that for some reason it disappeared. It got sucked into a vortex. Now everything's going haywire on the ship. According to Al, and Duncan, initially they weren't affected by the electromagnetic field because they were down in the hole in this enclosed area. But once they realized, hey, the shit's hitting the fan, we need to get up and out of here, they get up on top side. They see people in a daze. Some people were actually just zombie-like. At one point, there was a guy, when it had, materialized again, that the guy's arm was stuck in a bulkhead. But what happened is during this mess, they get the bright idea to jump off the ship, but they never landed in water. They cascade down into this green mist. And that's the other thing. When the electromagnetic field was pulsed, a green mist first surrounded the Eldritch, then it became invisible to the eye, and then it got sucked into the vortex, where they're just free falling, and then a blue flash occurred, and then this is where the story, it's so many contradictions, it's just bizarre. First, they're at Montauk 40 years later, August 12th, 83. But then you have the whole issue of Al and Duncan being in a hospital in 2137. This is where they discover about the earth changes, the natural disaster, the war, whatever it was that made geographical changes. And there's the whole other thing that Al finds himself further in the future. But the whole thing is, the way they explain this, and the way I started this video off, is how the project crashed. Well, here's the first contradiction. You can't have Al and Duncan jumping off the ship, appearing out on Montauk, all right, and at the same time, these yahoos or Duncan's in the chair creating Junior, and Von Neumann's there. None of this works. None of it adds up. And this is what I've stated for years now. And this is why you're not allowed to watch or listen to me. Because I'm one of the few people that understand who the frauds are across the board. So they're in this video, November 25th, 89. Now, what happened 2 weeks prior, on November 10th, 1989? I was honorably discharged from the Marine Corps. Now, this is the first coincidence, because at that point, they were no longer going to be able to control me, because they realized what happened on August 12th, 83, concerning me in this chair, that, they screwed up. They made a big mistake, and there's no turning back. So hence the Montauk conspiracy. But coincidentally, 2 weeks after I'm discharged from the Marine Corps, they are up and running. They've got a group that's in this video. You never see their faces. There's a woman there and 3 other men. They don't state their names, but they sound like they're legitimate curiosity seekers, because what happens is you have Al begin to do the MUFON circuit and start initially talking about the Philadelphia experiment. And what they do is, the reason why they only had the 4 initially is, remember, too many cooks spoil the stew. If they got too many of these conspiratorial theories being bantered about, you're going to get these contradictions. They can't keep their stories straight, not even the 4 of them. God forbid, let's say you had 100 of these goofballs talking about these conspiracies. Do you see what I'm talking about, people? So you have Al begin to do the MUFON circuit, and I'm trying to, in my mind, think on what's germane. What could I add that I haven't spoken about? But I want to go back to the January 13th 1990 MUFON conference in Dallas, Texas at the Metroplex, where Al gets into the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk Project. But what happens with Al is when they do these initial visits to Montauk, they figure out that they're part of it, their memories are starting to come back, and so they want to talk about it. Now, they go to this audience in Dallas, and I'm going to tell you, there was an answer question section, and none of these people were giving Al any leeway. They were very difficult on him, asking difficult questions. So the reason why I mention this is because none of these asshole frauds, the baby Draco James hybrid Rink, he didn't talk about it. But what Al stated concerning Blubber Boy here is that during this process, when they initially were getting together, there is a story that comes from a group. They were called EMI Thorn Industries. Initially, back in the 1800s, they were a scientific instrumentation corporation out in London. They were getting involved in all kinds of things, but during the time period of the Montauk Project, they were involved in film endeavors. And they were, I guess, I don't know what their function was, but they had something to do with the movie The Philadelphia Experiment. Now, with EMI, there's these two brothers, and their last name is Wilson. Now, my full name is Paul Wilson Lindner Jr. Totally unrelated, I'm sure, but you never know. So you have these Wilson brothers that are the initial owners of this EMI back in the 1800s. Now, according to Al, these EMI representatives in the 80s were attending these psychotronic conferences and probably various other conferences, and that in one in particular, they say, I don't know if it was the Ohio one or New York, these EMI representatives all of a sudden realize that this guy Preston is someone they've been looking for. He was one of the speakers at a conference that they attended, and they dial in on Preston and say, this is our guy. Now, what they do is they initially, this again, why didn't they just approach Preston at this conference? Or maybe they did, but they set up a meeting where they go up to Cairo, New York, where Preston was living at the time. And I could be wrong, but the thing of it is, Preston was out on Long Island in a town called Islip, where my father grew up at. So I'm not quite sure on how this works, but these EMI representatives go find Preston. They go to his house and they say, hey, look, we've been looking for you. And Preston's like, okay, what's your deal? And then we have something we want to show you. So what it is, it's a picture of 4 people. Now, this picture was taken by the Wilson brothers at some point in the late 1800s. Okay? Now, in the picture, the person taking the picture took a picture of the 2 Wilson brothers, an unknown individual, and another 4th individual by the name of Aleister Crowley. Now, when you invoke the name of Aleister Crowley, you're going to start scratching your head and say, uh-oh, red flag, danger, Will Robinson, we got a problem here. So the EMI reps say, this picture, we've come to believe that you are the guy in this picture, the one we can't identify. We knew the Wilson brothers. We know Aleister Crowley, but we couldn't figure out who this guy was. And now we know this guy is you. Now remember, Preston says he time traveled, okay? So Al throws that whopper out there, and I've already done the video. I went over these questions that the audience had asked Al on, hey, Aleister Crowley, and then there's these other issues. But, wow, I'm going to have to cut this short for various reasons. So we're gonna pick back up November 25th, 1989, where I'm discharged from the Marine Corps weeks prior, and we're going to go over this particular video and other stuff. And hey, this is turning out, like I said, Montauk Madness Month. These frauds, their time is up, especially little Stewie, because these other ones are all dead and gone, folks. But you know who's still hanging around being a pest? Good old Positive Paul, your buddy, your pal, and your worst nightmare for you social media frauds.